Hello, everyone, and welcome to New Ways of Learning and Working, finding hybrid models that benefit university staff and students. This is a Times Higher Education webinar in partnership with Salesforce. My name is Alistair Lawrence. I'm the Special Projects Editor at THE, and I'll be chairing today's discussion. I'm delighted to be joined by a group of experts today who will form our panel. They are Jacqueline McCormack, who's Vice President of EDI and Online Development at Atlantic Technology University, Louise Naylor, who is Director of Education at the University of Kent, Kai Peters, who is Pro Vice Chancellor for Business and Law at Coventry University, and Sarah Sweeney, who is Head of Student Support and Wellbeing at Lancaster University. There will be an opportunity to put questions to the panel during the final 5 or 10 minutes of the hour that we have scheduled. So please feel free to write down any questions that you have in the box in Zoom, and we will try to answer as many as possible before the end. The COVID-19 pandemic permanently disrupted the dynamic between staff and students while providing a catalyst for digital transformation. With hybrid learning creating opportunities to maximize student engagement, attainment, and employability, institutions are now redefining their modus operandi to drive greater impact. This webinar will bring together the panel of higher education experts to share knowledge and best practice about some of those new strategic challenges. And we're also joined by Maëlle Levenant, who is Senior Product Marketing Manager for Higher Education at Salesforce, who is going to share some related insights from the third edition of Salesforce's Connected Student Report, which is due to be published in September. Maëlle, would you like to share your screen and talk us through the findings?
Absolutely. Thank you, Alistair. Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me. I think you should be able to see my screen if I'm doing things right. My name is Maëlle Levenant, indeed, and I'm a Senior Product Marketing Manager at Salesforce. And I spend a good part of my job focusing on trends in the education sector and encouraging discussion with our customers and with the the community of higher ed professional, more generally speaking. That's why I very much look forward to this discussion, and I'm much grateful for Times Higher Ed to give us an opportunity to share the early insight about what will be our third edition of the Connected Student Report. So thank you in advance for your interest, and a special thank yous to our panelists for enriching this observation with your experience and perspective. And I'll move right in. So the Connected Student Report was born 3 years ago with the desire to explore significant trends and opportunity to enhance the student experience, and also to better understand the role that technology could play. Last year, the report taught us, for instance, that staff and students were calling for more well-being support, and we learned how institutions were responding to this call. I will drop in the chat all the links to the findings summary page of last year's report, the report itself, and the dynamic dashboards for those interested to take a closer look at the country level. But today, I wanted to share some early observation from this year report that we run across 8 GOs, and where we run qualitative interviews with cross-functional leader, meaning from senior executive in marketing department, recruitment and admission, student experiences, advancement department. The list was quite long, IT as well. We worked with the brilliant team of reputation leaders to understand how institutions are continuing to innovate post-pandemic, to bridge the skill gap, to deliver hand-to-hand student experiences, but more generally speaking, to sustain growth and positively impact the society at large. So the following slides summarize what we've learned with these qualitative interviews. They are not exhaustive. There will be more coming in September, and as I go through them, I highly encourage you to use the chat function and react and share your point of view, your opinion, because I'm very keen to see if what I share will resonate with you. So one of the first things that stood out when speaking with these leaders was that institutions were very intentional in their initiative and in their investment, most using a set of core values such as inclusion, flexibilities, impact to drive and guide how they transform, to guide their transformation. The pandemic highlighted opportunity to work differently, to collaborate better, to better support well-being of staff and students, but it has also further exposed latent gap and put inclusion into sharp focus. Numerous leaders recognize that there was a need to go beyond the status quo to make a lasting impact on their learners and on the society more broadly. And before I jump to the next slide, I think I will try to use the chat function because I wanted to quickly ask you if some of those values were resonated with you. And I wanted to also to find out like if you had important values that you uphold at your institution. So I'll drop the question in the chat and I'll continue with the presentation, but I'll be reading your answer shortly after. Oh, so moving on to the next slide. Those leaders also shared their focal areas moving forward, and rebuilding the student community was the #1 priority. Our interviewee shared looking into technology to reunite their community and rebuild learner relationship, but most importantly, they shared how deep listening, close collaboration, open communication, and holistic support were critical to foster student sense of belonging. And yesterday we had the first readout of the quantitative survey that we made for this research, and it actually showed that students who feel that they belong at their university are 3 times more likely to have a great university experience, which we found like incredibly resonated. The university are also looking into how to best leverage hybrid to optimize their modus operandi. Leaders are looking to strike the offline and online balance across the campus, and they shared it was not only a matter of survival, but also an unprecedented opportunity to create unique learner experiences, collaborate better, and to sustain growth. And beyond developing new offerings and new ways of working, some of our interviewees shared that transitioning to hybrid also meant reorganizing their team, decentralizing, centralizing resource, and that's why before I move to the next slide, as you can see, I'm powering through the findings. Before I move to the next slide, I was curious to see if there was also some reorganization on the way at your institution, and which department were you expecting to grow due or thanks to a hybrid learning. So I'll drop the question in the chat, and I encourage you to interact. I'm sure it will be used later on for the discussion. Oh, too quick. And our final slide, we learned with our interview, or our interviews confirm that career outcomes are now a key differentiator on which institutions are evaluated by students and the broader community. The short shelf life of skills really pushes university to think about student employability, not on the side, to think about student employability differently, not just on the side of the academic experience, but very much in symbiosis with it. And the leader we spoke with shared some of the initiatives that you see listed on the slide. I won't go into detail into them because you'll get a chance to read them afterwards. We'll share all of those slides with you. And those initiatives they consider key to bridge the employability gap. And for me, they also really demonstrate how university today are platforms in every sense of the word for employability. And so that's a very short intro. I don't want to hold you more from the great discussion that will be coming after that. So I thank you for your engagement, your interaction in the chat section, and I'm handing over to Alistair to facilitate what promises to be a rich discussion. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to our panelists. Over to you, Alistair.
Great, thank you very much, Mail. So just to pick up on the points, I'd like to start by asking the panelists, what has been the key to maintaining student and staff relationships in an increasingly online learning environment? Are there particular challenges that persist, or are there particular strategies that you've implemented recently that are being very effective for you?
Happy to give it a go, Alistair. Just before the pandemic, we had been working with a social learning platform called Aula, which we were implementing, which drove up the demand or the usage of students way higher than what we were doing with Moodle. So that was a really good way of connecting, and it's kind of mobile connecting rather than on the computer all the time, very social, chitty chatty, and that worked really very well. And that was about the best way of keeping track. It was actually really hard to keep track of students while teaching online, because you didn't know if they were there or were not paying any attention whatsoever. And you're constantly, as a faculty member, then going, please turn on your screens, as opposed to talking into a black bunch of names, as it were. So Aula we've been keeping up with, and that has been a good solution. But we can see now that the pandemic is, lessening, or at least not being written about in the papers very much anymore, that we did have a gap from before the pandemic to after the pandemic on student engagement and students turning up. So I'm open for any bright ideas other than the use of Aula, because we would really like to engage with students even further.
Kai, what does it tend to be that brings students back onto campus? Is it a particular type of interaction with tutors or with each other, or to have more to do with where they're located?
Yeah, I think it's as much the social aspect as anything. I thought it was really interesting, in the pandemic, we're paying $9,250 for nothing, but actually the education was the same. It was all the additional social elements, fun, going out, seeing each other, that disappeared, that the universities weren't really in a position to do anything about whatsoever. So we are seeing the students coming back, and we're trying to really ensure that they're not coming back to lectures. We've abolished large number of large lecture halls now. They're being torn down. And we want to make sure that someone's in class and speaking at least every 10, 15 minutes, because otherwise we all know it, even as faculty members and university professionals. If you go to a conference and you're droned at for a couple of hours and don't get a word in, you start playing with your telephone or having a little nap. So there's something about just the genuine engagement and making it worthwhile for the students to participate. So that's really our learning, is just to really make some changes from the historical style of higher education.
And you mentioned that some of the old use spaces, such as lecture halls, are being torn down. Is that being done with a strategy in mind of how to build student community, keep the student communities on campus, but give them a slightly different space and slightly different interaction to have when they come onto campus? Yeah,
absolutely. So that they'll be sitting in a room of 30 or 35 and not of 300. And if they're in the group of 30 or 35, to speak to each other and to make it genuinely worthwhile. There is something that we're having trouble wrapping our heads around. So we're trying to do a lot of the lectures online, but one's kind of driven by OFS/QAA kind of drivers, the rankings, how many hours of face-to-face are you offering? Well, does, online face-to-face count or not? Otherwise, I think as a community, we're all in a little bit of trouble about figuring out how to make it happen. Look, they're only getting 8 hours a week or whatever, somebody will say in the Daily Mail, and you go, yeah, but we're also giving them another 10 hours of online synchronous. So there are some dilemmas and some rules and regs that we need to wrap our heads around as a community.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Louise, can you tell us what this process looked like at the University of Kent? Are
Yes.
Radical change of use space on campus happening there as well? Or?
Yes, just to have a sort of quick follow-up to what Kai has said. I mean, obviously there was the initial rush to get everybody online, building capacity and capability in terms of working online. But one of the things that we developed was particularly ways of encouraging students to interact online. So making much greater use of our virtual learning environment, uses of quizzes, packaging lectures in different ways. And actually that really brought about quite a change in the thinking. However, we still had a problem with communication. And what we found was very useful was to have very regular webinars with staff and students, as well as pulse surveys, just to check in. How is this working? What are your main needs? So we did have sessions on, for example, etiquette online. We had some sessions on, cameras off, how you could encourage students to put cameras on and what that meant for them. And I just wanted to pick up on something that Kai said. I'm interested to hear your getting rid of lectures. Our recent pulse survey from students about the future of education is they want as much face-to-face teaching as they can, and that also includes lectures. So at our institution, the lecture is not dead, but having been through the pandemic, I think the way we are delivering lectures and preparing students before they come into the classroom is quite different. We're doing much more online to support that learning.
And are the lectures delivered in a blended format? So is there an option for students to either to attend in person or online?
Yeah, we do have that. So for example, take the example of our medical school. They use that very successfully, where they will offer a face-to-face lecture, but then it's followed up by some group sessions, which could be online, where groups are working on particular tasks, reflecting on the lecture. I've heard people do it the other way, where you start with a group session and then the ideas feed into the lecture. So people are mixing and matching these ways of doing things. Students in the main, if possible, seem to they like the flexibility of having both, but they do like the face-to-face contact with academics, and we're trying to prioritize that as much as possible. And I think that's what Kai is alluding to in terms of the government agenda, where we're being encouraged to give as much face-to-face time as we possibly can.
And do you need to build in a certain amount of provision for this to be faculty-led? So, for example, the demand for a number of hours in person for a STEM subject might be very different to...
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that we've said to our subjects, while we've had, general university principles around what will happen online, what will happen face-to-face, we do recognise that disciplines will be making decisions about what works best for them. In a timetable, when it says a lecture, the activity going on in that lecture may be very different depending on the subject. So we very much set the main parameters, but then it is a disciplinary decision about how best to balance the blend, if I could put it like that.
Okay, great. Sarah, as part of your role at Lancaster is head of student support and wellbeing, is there also other sort of non-academic factors that need to be brought into the equation when we're thinking about how many hours we're asking a student to come onto campus for?
Yeah, I think so, absolutely. I mean, we've been really looking at delivering kind of hybrid wellbeing and support services to kind of sit round that academic delivery. And because obviously, pre-pandemic, so at Lancaster, I think at a lot of universities, most of that support was in person only. There wasn't really, particularly for counselling, mental health support, there wasn't really an online option. That's completely changed, obviously, as a result of the pandemic. And we've spent the last year kind of offering a blended service where we've kind of given students a certain amount of choice as to whether they have an in-person appointment or an online appointment. We've tried to collect as much student feedback as possible about their preferences before the start of the year, and then we're collecting data to go along about what students are actually choosing to do and what their options are. And there are some activities where we've used that student feedback to offer like an online version and an in-person version, so not a blended, but two options. If you prefer the online tea and chat or group session, whatever it is, then that's available to you, but there's also the in-person one. We have been finding that it is, certainly for counselling and mental health, there's a preference for in-person from students and also from staff, actually. I think although some people do prefer online, a lot of people prefer the in-person, because it relies a lot on body language and empathy, and they find that creating a nice safe environment for the student in our counselling rooms, that works well. There are some students who have preferred online because they've felt comfortable to do something from home, or even if they're distance learners and can't get to campus but still need support. And I think that option to offer blended has really helped us to be more inclusive in the offer of our support services. So we certainly haven't required students to come in person for any of that wellbeing support. Actually, this year they've always had an online option, and I feel that's been a real enhancement to the service, and it has helped us to be more inclusive. But it does place a bit of a challenge on the service in terms of resource, because you're probably supporting more people, because people who might not have access to service as much in the past, which is a bad thing, because it was only in person and they couldn't come to campus for extra time. Now we're accessing it remotely, so we've got a bit of a challenge in terms of have we got enough resource to meet that student demand. And thinking about staff skills in online delivery, it's very different doing an online kind of group peer counselling session to doing an in-person one. So how is that being facilitated? It's really important to have cameras on if you're working in mental health and wellbeing, and not have people turn them off and things like that. So I think there's a kind of skills challenge there for some of our staff in delivering, in transferring their in-person activities into the online arena, and some of them have really relished that, and others I think are probably still struggling a bit. And we need to think about that, making sure it's as good. What you don't want is for the online experience and the online support offer to be inferior to the in-person offer. We want to do a high quality experience for both. The other challenge I think we've had, and from talking to other universities, I think a lot of other universities have had, is that integration of all our digital systems. So kind of a digital student experience now needs to be as important as the physical on-campus experience for me. Those two, I think the digital used to be a bit of an add-on, and the on-campus experience was the Lancaster experience. But I think now that digital platform, the digital experiences our students have are as much part of their university experience as the on-campus one. But we're not geared up for that digitally. We've got lots of different systems. We've got students flick around from one to another with different links. We've got a virtual learning environment. It's a different system to our student information data systems, and then we might use a different platform for counselling, for booking your appointment, to that you use for booking a social event with the Students' Union. So I think there's a lot of work to do there to make that, to create an effective hybrid student support offer from the university, because we need to make it feel kind of seamless and joined up with that in-person experience.
Some of the other leaders I've interviewed about this have made the point that by collecting that kind of data online about and interacting, offering wellbeing services online, it became easier to collate certain patterns. So, for example, certain student cohorts who just found it difficult to get onto campus because of the cost, or because of parenting or caring responsibilities and things like that. Are you able to gather those kind of insights in a way that you can combine that with when you're deciding what a blended strategy should be for delivering teaching and learning online? So is it say that if you have a particular student cohort who will always find it more of a challenge to come onto campus but still want to learn, you're able to build out a slightly different teaching and learning provision for them, or one that is flexible enough to absorb that restriction they have on their time?
We are working to do that. So we've just spent last year actually developing some guidance for different student groups, different communities of students, different groups of students, and particularly parents and carers and commuting students and distance learners actually are three of the ones that we've focused on. And then thinking about how we can be a bit more flexible and some of the requirements to have them come onto campus. So some of our programs do have a kind of sort of minimum attendance that you have to meet in order to pass them, and we're looking at kind of how we can be more flexible with those. So some programs have got more kind of opportunities to be flexible than others, and we're trying to look at how we can do that in a more inclusive way and give people more options. But key for me really is I want to be inclusive for everybody and not just put special arrangements in for individual students. So it's moving to that more inclusive approach where you shouldn't, rather than us making an adjustment for those 3 students who've got caring responsibilities that ask for it, could we have a more inclusive approach to the whole thing, so it's easier for everybody to access learning when it works for them, or in a blended way. But that is a challenge across the whole university in a suite of different programs. But that's where we want to get to. I think at the minute we're probably still in the making individual adjustments and trying to have a flexible approach. And we need to move on that journey really.
Okay, great, thank you. Jacqueline, how come to you next, please? I mean, you're Vice President of EDI and Online Development at Atlantic Technology University. I mean, this sounds like it speaks very closely to the type of work that you do in terms of how has this presented opportunities to maximize EDI and really sort of talk about some of the values that people touched on earlier that they want to promote?
Well, one of the particular projects maybe I would mention is we have a project Higher Ed for All, which I suppose it kind of follows on neatly really from what Sarah was talking about, because we have recognized that, you know, we need to offer different modes of learning and a lot of flexibility in order to accommodate all different types of students, because everyone who's academically able should have the opportunity to continue into higher education, and we need to try to facilitate that. So we launched 2 years ago, we launched 2 full-time online degrees, which were specifically designed for people who would find it too challenging to come to campus. So they maybe have a caring responsibility or a disability or some other factor that means they can't physically come to campus, and their only option up to then would have been to study part-time online, and that would have maybe taken 7 or 8 years to get a degree, whereas their on-campus counterparts could do it maybe in 3 years. So we partnered with the Disability Federation of Ireland and Family Carers Ireland to develop these degree programs, which were launched a couple of years ago. So they're proven to be growing in popularity and really trying to meet the needs of those students. But we have a whole spectrum of programs in Atlantic TU Sligo. Half of our students are online and flexible learners anyway, so we have a large suite of student support services. We, just before the pandemic, we were working very hard to ensure equivalent services for those online and flexible learners to the on-campus students, and then having all those supports in place, we were able to then use them when we had to suddenly flip to everyone studying online. So
go on, please.
No, I'm maybe just going to mention 2 particular mental health and wellbeing supports that we introduced that have, before the pandemic, our counsellors wouldn't have considered at all doing online counselling sessions or anything like that. And they now give students a choice of which type of counselling and support they want to receive. But we also introduced a tool called Being Well, Living Well, which is an online toolkit produced by Epigeum. And it's really to try and focus on the positive and prevent mental health and wellbeing difficulties. So we find a lot of engagement of that, and it's available to our staff and our students. And then last year we also piloted, or this academic year, we piloted the use of SilverCloud, which is a cognitive behavioural therapy system, which is really, as well as trying to maintain good mental health and wellbeing, it's also to try and treat mild to moderate depression and anxiety. So we've been piloting that during this academic year as well.
And are these measures that are useful to support staff as well as students with the disruption that they've experienced?
Yes, they're available to staff and students. And in fact, in the area that we live in, our local council also bought SilverCloud, a module of SilverCloud for anyone at all in the area who wanted to use it. To try and help maintain their mental health and well-being. So, we're still at a kind of a pilot stage with that, with SilverCloud, particularly Being Well, Living Well. We've had a lot of positive engagement from students and staff. SilverCloud, we're still piloting it at present.
Okay, thank you. I mean, that takes us on to another point that we'd like to discuss today, which is just the level of investment in technology and the staff development that goes with that is needed to improve an institution's staff's well-being and also their productivity, because it's a huge challenge. I mean, Kai, I know you mentioned Aula that you had in place prior to the pandemic, but are there other platforms that you've had to rapidly onboard, and has it been a kind of a trial and error in terms of seeing how much you invest in them, or is there any way that you can really sort of put up a series of checks and balances that helps you stress test a new investment in technology before you make it?
Well, I had, Alistair, kind of an epiphany in the kind of period of lockdown, because we used FutureLearn for fully BBC quality online degree courses. Bells, whistles, build cost probably 300 to 500 grand for a master's degree in that kind of a space. And we realized that only made sense for big programs. And I think as an industry, we have to ask ourselves whether all 12,000 business schools in the world all need their own online MBA program, but that's for another day. But we also realized we could teach smaller courses very well with Aula and with Zoom and with Teams, etc. So I think we're going to get into this 2-speed thing, One is the fully kind of online bells and whistles version. The other is kind of online light, where the build cost will only be like 30 grand and not 300 grand. So a significant difference that's coming our way. And when I talk to the white label online providers, they're also grappling with what the future looks like. You know, here I am, LMS, expecting to get tons and tons of students, but most of those courses are covered. So what do we do about the niche ones? We then invested also in Salesforce that we're getting up and running to keep track of the communication with the students in the application pipeline, and are trying to extend that into the period where they're studying. And we also have a whole panoply of online CBT, et cetera, all kinds of services. Every time I put up the ecosystem of technology to support students, it's like this giant thing like this. I don't know that there was anything super duper that we did differently. What we did have to do at Coventry is probably 40 to 50% first generation at university students, many from the Midlands, many from kind of East London. We had to give away or lend out laptops hand over fist during the pandemic. We had over 1,000 students that were just technologically poor, and there's only so much you can do on your telephone, really. So I think collectively, we also have to think about the space where our students are and come to them, rather than thinking, oh, we're so clever, we know things because we work at universities and we have nice home offices and we have good tech, and we're not 3 of us at the kitchen table sharing bandwidth for kids in secondary school and kids in universities. So we're trying to do stuff that isn't bandwidth intensive at the moment.
Okay, does that resonate then if the other panelists, now you have a bit more flexibility, now we're out of the harshest lockdown measures, where some of the tech platforms that you're using are becoming more slimmed down, or they're becoming, as Kai said, there's sort of a lighter bandwidth option?
I mean, certainly, just if I say it, Kent, you know, something like MS Teams has been our core. We were developing it before the pandemic, but it hadn't been launched. We had to launch it in the pandemic. And there was a lot of resistance initially because it was new technology. But the ways that people are now using this, so for example, we do lecture capture with Panopto, but actually people are saying, well, MS Teams, I can get the chat, I can get translation, I can get recordings. So it's interesting. You know, you don't need high tech to do some of these things. And I wanted to make another comment. I think students respond really well when it's not a polished performance, because it becomes then a more authentic learning experience. You know, when we're teaching students face to face, it's more like a discussion. It's not didactic. So I think using some of these tools, but not having the well-polished product, if you like, is actually an advantage, because it's about that relationship building with students. Just to say, I noticed a couple of people in the chat are asking about online exams, and those of us who are still doing exams, because I know some institutions are even moving away from final summative exams towards more coursework. We're certainly at the moment keeping our final year or our final exams at the end of the year online, but we've been using Moodle for that. It's worked very well, but it's not an exam platform. And like many, I'm reading in the chat, people talking about AI, you know, the issues around open book, the issues around student identity, and of course, integrity as well. Academic integrity is becoming an issue. So we are in the process of looking at whether we move towards proprietary software in order to allow us to keep our exams online. Students like it, overwhelmingly like it based on our surveys, but there are some issues with it. And actually we want to push a lot of the assessment more continuous assessment during the teaching term, rather than these high stakes exams at the end, which actually cause a lot of mental health issues for students.
Yeah, Louise, if I can just chip in very quickly. We also had some issues in accounting, where the accounting exams are supposed to be face-to-face, but the students couldn't leave China because they were trapped there, had no burning desire to come to the UK for a week to sit exams anyway. And we had to get the Association of Business Schools and everyone involved in kind of going, it was okay over lockdown, and now suddenly you've declared the end of June the deadline. That's just not practical. And So the accounting bodies said, yes, it's okay. But there was a particular kind of proctoring software that we were using anyway. Yeah, but there are definitely issues on that space.
I mean, it's certainly a challenging area, and we've used a couple of different remote proctoring services with different degrees of success. We were using it for our international students before COVID, and then a lot of our assessments did change to cumulative assessment during COVID, but we still had, some modules with exams. So we've been using Examity for the last couple of years. One of the things in particular that we're just introducing this year is for the students to use a wide-angled camera, that they need to get, they purchase themselves, so that helps to kind of reassure some staff, particularly in things like maths and things like that, that it's actually the student doing the work themselves. But it isn't without challenges. There are challenges around that whole area, and I suppose it's trying to, demonstrate that there are other types of assessments that can be done that are, just as robust and being imaginative and creative about it.
I mean, another question I had in relation to that, I suppose, is where do you currently think you need more resource in, perhaps in terms of manpower? If you are able to serve large numbers of students with perhaps slightly fewer digital platforms than you thought, where is the support needed now in order to deliver teaching and learning and everything that goes along with that? Sarah, would you?
Sorry, I'm muting myself.
It's okay.
Yeah, I think there's all sorts of places where we need the resource. It's a hard one to answer that. I think there's definitely equipment, particularly if we're thinking about kind of blended, hybrid kind of classroom experiences, lecture experiences, seminar room experiences. There's an investment in technology to go onto our campuses to enable that to be a high quality experience for the students who aren't in the room, to make sure you've got a high quality recording that needs to be done. And the challenge with technology there is, I think it's always moving on, isn't it? And developing. So you need, it's not a one-off, it's going to be an ongoing investment, and probably a rolling program of going around your campus and updating things and then doing it again in a kind of schedule. I think the skills training for staff, as I've said before, that's going to be for teaching staff and for support and well-being and other staff as well, about how to manage that kind of a blended experience well, how to manage an online experience well, and to support that, and how you best integrate it with the learning. And then there's making sure that staff have got the right kit as well for that kind of hybrid experience. If staff are going to work from home or work from campus, or work delivering something online but from campus, we've got to make sure they've got the right IT kit and the right training, the right skills, and that technology doesn't become a barrier and another sort of harassment to something they're already grappling with. If we can smooth it through and remove some of those barriers and challenges, I think that's really important. And and the same is going to apply to students. We really need to think, if we're moving into a more kind of blended online in-person experience for our students, have they all got the kit they need? And there's a to be inclusive, we might need to support those students who can't afford a laptop or haven't got a quiet room at home to engage with an online class. And how do we make sure we are inclusive in our digital opportunities as well? It's not just as simple as putting something online and sure everybody knows.
What about the faculty members who live rurally up in Lancaster, certainly in the West Midlands? They're in some village, and to do a seminar, they got to stand on their roof, holding onto the antenna, holding their phone heavenwards to get one little micro bar.
Yeah, no, that's really true. And we've locally here, we've got some real challenges, and we've got students out in the rural areas as well who face that same challenge with Wi-Fi and breadth of stuff, and there's thinking about some delivery sometimes, and if you are streaming videos and things, that's not always going to work for people who've got that poor kind of bandwidth and things. So yeah, it's how do we be equitable and support those people who maybe haven't might have to be on campus more because of that situation at home. It's challenging, isn't it? Yeah, having a hybrid model that is also kind of fair and doesn't exclude people. It's got real opportunities there to be more inclusive, but you be careful not to accidentally exclude people as well. So
is there with the hybrid model, is there also an expectation to scale the online provision, to perhaps scale the reach and scale the size of the faculty, and also the different types of courses that you can offer with the flexibility of online? And does that create additional pressures on staff or additional considerations where universities now need to start thinking about, okay, well, where are we going to add resource to really support our online provision?
Well, one of the things one of the strong subjects in our university is engineering, and we've had a lot of imagination and creativity in terms of how to reproduce engineering practicals remotely, as we've invested a lot of time and energy and creativity in that. On the campus, we have a couple of rooms full of, I'm not an engineer now, but like miniature engineer rigs, which will start moving in the middle of the night if some students doing a practical when they're on shift, and they can operate these things remotely to allow them to be able to do their practicals. And investing in that, and I suppose allowing people to pilot different things in terms of creative solutions. Just before the pandemic, one of our kind of aims was to try and have an engineering degree that was fully online, which the kind of pandemic kind of forced us into maybe accelerating that. So now we have a version of our mechatronics engineering course which is fully online, and we're now also hoping then to expand that out to for students internationally in developing countries, who wouldn't have access to those types of equipment.
Yeah, one of the things that Mahal mentioned in her presentation was about being able to embed employability skills or preparation or experience of employability alongside more of the core tenets of what a student studies over the course of their degree with that in mind, Jacqueline, you're mentioning engineering students working flexibly and studying on their own time. Is there a way to increase capacity that increases opportunities for things like placements or experience with industry with online? I mean, our employers are receptive to the idea of offering online placements that are long-term now, that aren't just emergency measures?
Well, we've certainly been, thinking along those lines recently, and we've been in discussion with a number of different employers about that kind of concept. We've also been putting a lot of effort into developing some work-based learning courses where students are in the workplace and studying then part-time online, so they're employees, so they're still doing like a full-time kind of study, as it were, but they're in the workplace. So we have quite a few of those degrees under development at the moment. And also we're working on a project-based learning engineering course as well, that the students will have very few formal lectures and a lot of kind of project-based work which could be done in remote teams as well as face-to-face.
Okay, thank you. And to the other panelists, how does employability skills tend to sort of rear its head in the discussions that you're having about the hybrid learning delivery? Is it something that people are generally quite attuned to, or is it still a challenge to know exactly how to embed those kind of employability skills alongside teaching and learning online?
We centralized everything on the kind of employability side, and had another epiphany, which was basically that our online team, which is large, it's 80 to 100 people, could actually be used for all kinds of things other than inventing new MBA programs to try and sell online. So they've been doing little MOOCs on employability skills, all kinds of things. And that's really been very helpful, just to think about technology to support all the students anytime, anywhere, rather than having to turn up to a seminar on writing your CV or how to use LinkedIn or how to do a job interview. That seems a useful thing that you can get a lot of mileage out of, and that has been proving to be really quite successful. We have also had a lot of internships that were at a distance. I'm not sure that they're all going to be there. It's kind of up to us to push it as well, because distance learning overcomes distance. So in theory, you could get a project in Singapore while sitting in Coventry. We can get a guest speaker from Singapore while sitting in Coventry. And I kind of hope that these things don't disappear again when we go back to the old normal.
Okay, thank you. Louise, how's this sort of scaling and changing at your institution take?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, first of all, in response to what Kai's just said there, one of the things that we did run successfully during the pandemic were digital placements, because students were obviously disappointed. They were either missing employment placements or a particular year abroad. And of course, with everybody moving online, we said, well, you can dial in to France or Germany or wherever you were going to go, because they've got provision online. So we were able to use it that way. I know there's quite a bit of chat about the hybrid. We're using hybrid very selectively in subjects where we feel it will be beneficial. Those of you who've run hybrid sessions will know it's quite a challenge to keep all your audiences engaged, respond to the chat, respond to people in the room, make sure that everybody's getting an equal opportunity. So we're keeping the hybrid engagement quite minimal, but I've indicated there, we have equipped some teaching space and more importantly, meeting space for staff, because we're running a hybrid working scheme at the university. Staff can be working from home 2 days a week. And therefore, we need to be able to run meetings, and we need to have the option to run these in a hybrid format, depending whether people happen to be on or off campus that day. So this is something that's just bedding down in terms of how effective it's going to be. I think the feedback from some of the students, because someone asked me a question about the blend and how do you get the blend when students are taking different subjects. I think students prefer a very clear, this is face-to-face, this is online, we can have it in the timetable, we can look across the programme, make sure there's a blend of activity in the week. We think students prefer that rather than the hybrid approach, which seems to be, it can work, but no particular audience gets the best benefit out of it. I think it's hard for the teacher. I think it's hard for people in the room and the people online. Having said that, one area that we're looking at, for example, this has been mentioned, MBA, bringing in employers, can you join us for 15 minutes for a chat or whatever, dialing people in so we can animate the curriculum in the classroom. And we can draw in other people from industry as well. I think that's been very effective, because often trying to get that employability in the curriculum, the best way to do it is to have employer engagement in the curriculum. And I think the digital platforms have really made a difference there. We've got a lot more engagement in things like our careers fair, both face-to-face and online.
Do the digital platforms also offer an opportunity for better alumni engagement and tracking where your students graduate to, and also reaching out to students who have moved into certain industries that you would like to engage with more, so you can offer more of the kind of work-based placements we were talking about?
Yep, I think it's a possibility. I don't think yet we're fully realizing the benefit of that. Again, it comes down to a systems issue. So we've got one system that deals with alumni. So after a certain number of years, students will move, their records move on to a different system. So it's about getting systems to talk to each other, but certainly our careers and employability service, they have a platform that will allow employers and students and staff to come together, so they can post, we're looking for a project in this area. The employer can come in and say, I have a project like that, or have a placement. So we do have a bespoke platform for encouraging this type of employer engagement, and particularly in terms of students being able to do real live projects, placements, group work around something that's going on in the workplace. But in terms of that, end-to-end registration through graduation and then becoming alumni, that's not yet perfect in terms of doing that.
Okay.
One of the things that we've done recently, Alistair, and it's just relatively new, we've launched a service called mycareerpath.ie. And this is a kind of an online platform which has involved very close engagement between employers and prospective students to ATU. So it focuses on a kind of mapping out learning pathways for students. So they have the opportunity to have online interviews with a career learning pathway advisor who will kind of map out where they're aspiring to go to, and help them look at what qualifications and experience they would need to get in order to get there, to help them with the recognition of prior learning. And we're also working with specific employer groups who are wanting bespoke kind of learning pathways for staff or categories of staff within their organizations, and helping them to kind of map out the career path those staff, and what sort of skill sets they need to develop, and how we can then provide those for the students.
Do you think that will lead to an increase in even greater amount of student-led career pathways through the different modules that an institution has on offer? Because there's already some instances of there being quite a lot of personalization where an institution has a MOOC, and you will see that students are perhaps taking courses for a particular skill set or from a different discipline just because they're concerned about their employability prospects, and they might be coming from a particular discipline that doesn't have that set as part of the core curriculum, so they are selecting it. Is when you include a structure like that, do you think you potentially make it slightly easier for students to see, if they do have access to a MOOC, what other short forms of study they would like to select to help their career options? That's
certainly part of what we're working towards. I'm actually on our Galway campus today, because we have a big workshop today with employers trying to map out what that would look like and how we would facilitate that. You know, to have a range of micro-credentials available for students who only need particular bits. And I suppose it's all about making it as accessible and flexible as possible, really helping students through the recognition of prior learning process, which can be quite rigorous and daunting for them. And then mapping out, you know, what skills are they lacking in, and how can we, you know, support them in that and make it as accessible for them as we can.
Okay, it really goes to that whole stackability, doesn't it? Where I was looking at, you know, what is available on all of the Coursera, etc., edX platforms, and who can you progress from and to. So if you do the 1/3 of a master's of some of those MIT ones on supply chain, there are about 22, 23 different universities that recognize that and will waive 1/3 of the master's degree. One in Germany where you only pay another 600 euros to top up to your master's. And if you want to carry on in other places, it's like $35,000, $40,000, $50,000. So I think that's also what we're going to start getting. We need to get better at accreditation of learning other than in our own institution. We all signed up to Bologna. We're supposed to have mobility. And yet all of our institutions make it, you know, we practically map word for word in module by module with somewhere else, rather than saying if they spent 4 months at MIT, they probably did a good deal to go to 4 months to MIT. We don't need to map it against what we do exactly. So there are some strange things that we haven't, the bridges that we haven't crossed yet in this kind of hybrid online future looking world that, Maël was on. If France instituted a government body to give you accreditation of prior learning and bachelor's degree equivalency, because the universities were too stubborn, you know?
Yeah, we have a national project on it in Ireland as well, across all of the institutes of technology, the technological universities and universities. And one of the challenges, I suppose, Kai, is around digital credentialing and having a robust enough system to enable those types of things to happen. That's, you know, that's reliable and robust enough. And that's certainly one of the challenges. I mean, there's different systems out there, but I suppose it's a challenge trying to just select what's the best, and then also being able to, you know, have reliable information that somebody has really undertaken modules or half a master's or whatever.
Yeah.
They haven't just downloaded their certificate from some forgery place, which you have a certificate in 10 minutes from wherever if you want it, you know.
You get your PhD that way, I hear. Yeah. Blockchain, huh? And some of those European micro-credentialing consortia that have tried to come up with what credit sizes can you add together in your Lego box to make something that's 360 or 120 or 180 or whatever it is, or whatever the ECTSs are, half of that.
Okay, I just wanted to jump back slightly to, we've got about 7 or 8 minutes left. One of the questions we had in the chat about building the resilience that's needed for staff and students in order to manage the amount of disruption that Jacqueline and Kai were talking about when it comes to selecting modules and building curricula, but also before that, the integration for work experience and the expectations of going into the workforce and what skills are needed and why this will be a different test to them to traditional academic study. Sarah, I was wondering, is there these conversations that you've had with colleagues about how best to build this kind of resilience for staff and students who might have more interaction with industry now than an earlier stage than they had previously?
Yeah, and I think it's about making sure that we're sending our students out with their degree, with the skills they need to be successful in the workplace as well. I think several people have commented in the chat on that some of the adjustments that you might get at university, you're not going to get in the workplace, and you'll be expected to go in. So we've been really focusing on trying to help students and staff actually kind of cope with change in an ever-changing environment, and one of the things about technology is it is always evolving, and it's once you've learned to use something, it's suddenly got a new feature. So I think we're really trying to focus on helping them be more kind of open to change and able to cope with it, and able to manage that, and able to understand it, and also how to kind of to cope with that, not be overwhelmed by it, and manage it with the rest of their life. But I think very much thinking about our degree outcomes is how are we preparing students for the workplace? And yes, some of that is learning to cope in a digital workplace, but the in-person stuff is just so valuable for that, and we mustn't lose that. So that, I think we're trying to get that balance right, in that no matter how blended or online, we've offered some great digital opportunities. There are some key things that you get from your degree, from the in-person experience, whether that's the kind of conversations you have in the classroom with your peers, with your lecturer or seminar lead, the presentation you give, the group project you sat working in the cafe on, but those skills and those learning, those social interactions, that building that confidence, engaging with people who are kind of more expert than you, and also with your peers, that's really important, and you can't replicate that always online. So I think those are skills that employers still very much need, despite us being in a changed workplace, and I think that's really important. So we are starting to think about what are the core competencies that we expect students to come out with, not just with their academic knowledge and expertise, but those kind of skills they need to have learned, and those need to be changed to reflect this hybrid experience and the hybrid workplace they'll be going into.
If I could just add quickly to that, one of the things that we have observed, so I've got Student Learning Advisory Service that work with me, providing academic advice and guidance for students. They have noted the massive increase in students reporting loneliness at university. And we know universities are very busy places. We put on lots of activities for universities, but this is a new thing. And so what we were encouraging staff to think about, and of course Advanced HE have just done a big report on education for mental health, is how do you embed this in the curriculum? What are the opportunities for group work? What are the opportunities for peer interactions? Are there assessments where you can bring students together, put them into different cohorts so they have to socialize with other students? And I think to some extent, I've heard a student even say, is it all right for me to socialize with somebody in a different department? This is maybe a year ago when we were coming out of very strict restrictions, and they've forgotten how to just socialize normally. So we're encouraging this, not just in terms of extracurricular activity, which is always very nice, but actually in terms of building it in the curriculum. Where are the opportunities for your students to get belonging, a sense of purpose, to try out new ideas, to make friends in ways that we just took for granted before?
Thank you. We've got about 3 minutes left. I wanted to, for the final question, I wanted to sort of draw on something else that was mentioned in the chat about what changes are being implemented for the next academic year. I mean, I think that shows perhaps just the rate of change that we're discussing and the amount of options people have. It becomes quite difficult for people to know, okay, when should I be benchmarking this? When should we be taking a step back and deciding to implement new strategies and new policies? We don't have that much time left. So in the couple of minutes that we have, I just thought I'd ask each panelist if there is a particular change that they would like the institution to make for the next academic year, or if there is one coming that they think will be particularly helpful, and maybe tell us about that.
I'm happy to make a start on this. Assessment and feedback, I will not be the first person or the first university to be saying this has now become a real focus of activity. What the pandemic did was it shone a bright light on the fact that a lot of our assessment was assessment of learning, not for learning. It was summative. It was done at the end of a module. It wasn't done throughout the module in a formative way. So this is a very active project on my desk at the moment. It's partly because of the change in the regulations that are coming from OFS and the B conditions around assessment and feedback and what we need to be doing there. But the more important thing is I sense there's an appetite for change now within some of our staff to really be looking at the curriculum, really be looking at assessment and feedback and say, start from what do we need our graduate outcomes to be? And therefore, how do we deliver our curriculum, including things like well-being and embedding employability? And how do we make sure that students can learn this as they go through their student journey? They learn to reflect, they scaffold their learning, they understand the transformational power of education. Probably won't be able to do it in a year, but that's what's on top for me at the moment.
Okay, great, thank you.
One of the things that I would love to see happen in our institution is to develop more agile processes for course approval. It's industry are coming looking for training and whatever, and they want it like yesterday. And we all know that universities tend to work by committees, and it can take a long time to go through the academic approvals process. So that would certainly be a challenge. That I would like to see us getting more agile at doing that. But assessment is another thing similar to Louise.
Great, thank you. Kai, Sarah, is there anything on topping your wish lists for next year?
I guess I covered both of those previous points. We're trying to simplify. We get ourselves into such a muddle sometimes in higher education. Approvals are too complicated. Assessment is too voluminous and too complicated. Course pathways are all different in the different faculties, even in the same faculty. This one's 15 credits, that one's 20 credits. This one wants to do this and this one wants to do that. So we're trying to have kind of first year as a landing year with pathways off it, with a simplified naming structure, certainly at undergrad. Because if you're 16 trying to decide what you want to study in university, it's not going to be microphysical nanotechnologies, is it now? If you can say, I want to do engineering, or I want to do business, or I want to do psychology, that's already a step in a good direction. You can figure out what you want to do in second year or into your master's level if you can keep carrying on. So yeah, I think collectively we should think about simplifying life. It's just too complicated at universities. It feels like local government to me sometimes.
Okay, Sarah?
Yeah, I think probably linked to what other people have said, the big thing for me that I'd like to see is kind of more inclusive curriculum, and those curriculum reforms being more inclusive and thinking about how we can embed inclusivity kind of by design. So we're having to make, we're not having to make as many adjustments for students who've got particular needs, and that could be because they're disabled, or because they've got caring responsibilities, or because they need to commute or study at a distance. But then we kind of redesign our curriculums to think about a kind of more inclusive, more open and kind of diverse approach to delivering our degree programs, really.
Great, thank you very much. Well, that takes up to time, I'm afraid. So I'd like to thank again our panel, Jacqueline, Louise, Kai, Sarah. Thank you all very much for sharing your insights. It's been great to hear so many examples in what's been quite a short period of time. Thank you again to Maëlle and our colleagues at Salesforce for partnering with us for this event. There will be a recording for on demand that will be sent to everyone who's registered to attend the event today. And we'll also send you a summary article of the key findings that are published on the THE website. So thank you all very much for joining us. In the audience, we had about 150 people in, which is great on such a hot, sunny day. And we look forward to seeing you at other THE events. Thank you and goodbye.